Today marks 20 years since the 9/11 attacks in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and of course at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Today, I talk one-on-one with one of those first responders on the scene, Chevalo Wilsondebriano, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Chevalo Wilsondebriano, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
All right, thank you. So happy to be here.
Oh, you're very
Happy to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome. You know, obviously, you and your wife are household names here in Charleston and really around the world with your Charleston Gourmet Burgers brand.
Yeah.
And even before that, I know that you were a first responder for our country, being a paramedic working for the New York City Fire Department in the EMS division. Today, obviously, is unfortunately the 20th remembrance of the 9/11 attacks, which took place in New York City, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and of course, Washington, D.C. Who are you now versus 20 years ago?
Well, it's funny. I mean, who am I now from 20 years ago is really a changed person, somebody who really appreciates being here, appreciates life, and really has a different perspective on life. I mean, before then, 20 years ago, it was more happy-go-lucky, really just going through life. While now, I realize that every day must have a purpose. You know, tomorrow is not guaranteed. You know, life, when you go through such a tragedy and your life flashes before you, I mean, it lets you realize that, hey, you have to appreciate every single day. And just, hey, if something happens to you, God forbid, you just have to realize that you've done everything. You've lived your day to the fullest. You've done everything in life that you wanted to accomplish. And that's the type of person I am now that's different than 20 years ago.
What is your purpose now?
Well, my purpose now is to just make the world a better place and to just spread love, whether or not it is, you know, through our company and with food, or whether it is by just being a good parent, being a role model, whether it is just being an example in the community of someone who just is doing the right thing, is making right in their relationships with their children, with their wife, or as you know, September 11th made me realize, hey, you know, you can't just bring along a girlfriend. This is like an example. You know, we've been dating for 4 years, having a girlfriend, and September 11th made you realize, hey, you have to do things right. You know, as in the vernacular of today, put a ring on it.
Yes.
Which I did, and you know, got married, and hey, you know, you can't have your wife and kids just living anywhere. You know, work hard, and you know, have a great home, a great roof over their head, and you know, always be a positive example. I mean, those are the things, and then you have to realize every day that you've done that. And for me, that gives me that fulfillment that every day I've done something to spread love throughout the world, putting smiles on people's faces, you know, sharing our story, putting smiles on people's faces, you know, with food, something everybody loves. Yes. You know, that's our life now. That's my life now.
Let me go back to then. How did your day start on September 11th? I know I was in junior high school I was a junior at Burke High School when that occurred 20 years ago. How did your day start as a paramedic?
Well, number one, thank you for showing my age. But yes, but really that morning, I mean, at 37 years old, I was you know, working with New York City Fire Department, and I'm a motorcycle rider. And when September in New York is normally pretty cool, pretty cold, so I had put the motorcycle up really for the year, not expecting to have an opportunity to ride it. But September 11th, 2001 was such a beautiful day. It was so warm. The sky was so clear. It made me say, hey, let me ride my bike into work that morning. And so it was such a beautiful day. Got into work. I worked at a New York City Fire Department, Emergency Medical Service Station in Queens. Queens is one of the outer boroughs of New York City. And so I got there, and was really figuring out what my assignment was going to be for the day. And we hear on the radio that there's on the walkie-talkie, like there's been an explosion and fire at the World Trade Center. And, we really didn't know what it was. There was really no talk of a plane. It was just an explosion of fire at the World Trade Center. And so I was ordered to start checking out our disaster ambulance, because where I worked, we had this massive, like it was a converted RV school bus type of thing. That was our disaster mass casualty ambulance. So I went over to it to make sure that I had a good amount of equipment in it, just in case that I was going to be sent down. At that point, I wasn't. And then a few minutes later, I hear the guys at the station, whoa, oh my gosh. Oh. And they're telling me that a plane, they saw it fly into the World Trade Center. And at that point, I then got an order on the walkie-talkie that said, hey, MERV, because it's Mobile Emergency Room Vehicle from Queens, roll to the World Trade Center. That means I'm going. And so that is what really started the events of the day.
Ooh, okay. And as you mentioned, and you told Channel 4 this, we heard on the walkie-talkie that there was an explosion at the World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. When do you what was going through your mind at that point?
Well, really, what was going through my mind, I really didn't fully understand what it was. To me, in my mind, I really thought it was like a navigational error or something, because I didn't really see it on TV at that point to really see how intentional it really looked. So I was kind of going by the accounts of what the guys at the ambulance station said, and we weren't really sure at that early time what it was. And so I knew that if the explosion or navigational error, whatever it was, that there's a possibility that there were going to be a lot of patients, a lot of casualties. And in my mind, all I was focusing on was getting to the World Trade Center.
Okay, so when you got there, did you hear where exactly at the World Trade Center the explosion / fire occurred?
Well, when I was on the way to the World Trade Center, number one, it took a long time to get there, because coming from the outer borough, the bridges being closed and all these people on the road, it took us, we had a driver. It really took us a long time to get there. So I could see at some point, like crossing over it's called the Queensboro Bridge that goes into Manhattan. I could see that there was fire coming from near the top of the building. So I knew that, and I was also on the phone with my then girlfriend, now my wife, Monique, who was trying to give me updates on what was happening. But one tower had collapsed right before I arrived at ground zero. So when I arrived there, I really didn't even have time to take in the scene, because I was immediately inundated with firefighters who were hurt, who were having trouble breathing, and people who survived the first tower. So that was really, I didn't have a chance to do anything but to work on taking care of these people.
Absolutely. When you got down to ground zero, did you actually have personally any trouble breathing?
Oh no! When I arrived, everything was fine with me. I was inside the vehicle as I arrived at ground zero that time. So everything was fine. The first collapse happened. There was a lot of dust and in the air at that point. But I seemed pretty all right. When the firefighters who were hurt, they were coming in. They really had the dust. They really had the dust and the debris, all in them that they were breathing in.
Jesus. And unfortunately, some of those people passed away because of obviously that dust and other situations. But you said this quote, immediately I was just inundated, as you mentioned, with firefighters who were hurt, firefighters who were having trouble breathing, who survived the first tower collapse, as you just mentioned just a second ago. Let me ask you, how many of those guys were inside your ambulance?
Oh, wow. There were, I would say, over, I can't even count, but it was over a dozen. It seemed like it was an endless stream. of just people coming in. I was just pulling down oxygen masks, just trying to get everyone to have some oxygen and to help. But it wasn't really that long. I wasn't even in there long taking care of the guys, until I heard this rumble, felt this rumble, a deep rumble. And I thought it was like underneath the disaster vehicle because it was shaking. And the thing is, the guys that survived the first tower collapse, they knew what it was. So they immediately were saying the second tower is going. Now, we were parked right by the tower that was up. So they said, we got to go. So they started filing out, and I just followed them. But I remember just stopping for a moment when I came out of the door to follow them and start running. And I looked up and can see, because when you're so close up on a building in Manhattan, you really have to really bend your back to look. But it was like, I could say like the gaping hole, and the whole thing was twisting and falling. And that was the most scariest thing I ever seen. I just had to run with and follow the guys, follow and go. Now at that point, the flume and the debris and the dust, totally engulfed, as we were running. And then we went into a guy's pickup truck in the back of it, trying to get down. It engulfed us. Now then I breathed in all this stuff and started with the coughing and the having to clear and all of that. So at that point, yes, it really got to me.
Got to you. Okay. And I know that you had to pull down a lot of oxygen masks, obviously, for those first responders. What else did you have as far as equipment?
Oh, well, I had the whole disaster ambulance, which had multiple stretchers, and we had bandages and irrigation. A lot of the guys who were coming in, their eyes, they couldn't see because of all the dust and debris. So I had like normal saline and sterile water that I would have to use, that was using to try to irrigate their eyes, so they can see and get going. And once you, I guess, finished, stop running and got to obviously a safe location, where exactly did you end up at? Yeah, so leaving ground zero, started running, got into the back of the guy's pickup truck, and we just went a few blocks up. But I went as far as I could to escape the debris and the dust, and then I worked on getting back, because at that point I separated from my partner who came down, so I couldn't. So I spent hours now looking for him, trying to get back to the vehicle to see how much of the vehicle was salvaged, because it was blown. All this stuff was blown all inside of the vehicle as the doors opened and the windows and all this stuff went in the vehicle. And lots of other guys were asking me, Wilsondebriano, have you seen this guy? Have you seen this guy? And stuff like that. So, it's just terrible to know that guys that came down with me and that initial wave and that initial call from the walkie-talkie, they didn't get home that night.
Wow. When you got back down to ground zero, what was your view then?
So got back down. It was just so much dust and debris. I really couldn't even take in the scene of what it was. It just seemed like a massive amount of destruction. And at that point, we didn't know if anything else was coming, if other aircraft. So we ended up moving back. There was a building that was still on fire called the World Trade Center number 7. And so that houses where the Office of Emergency Management for New York was. So that was still under. So we were ordered to move if the vehicle could run, which it still was able to run. Wow. So we were able, it was dirty. It was filled with soot and stuff, but it ran. And so we were able to move it back and to be more nearer to World Trade Center number 7 in case that collapsed, which it did later in the day, later in the afternoon. it ended up collapsing, and we were there to just to see if there were any body who was hurt with that.
Oh my God, that's so. Oh my, awful, 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 awful.
Yeah.
You said this too, quote, I looked up, as you mentioned earlier, and it was like a gaping hole, but the building was twisting and coming down at the same time. It was just so scary. I had to follow the guys and start running, as you just mentioned. Let me ask you, how long did that twisting take place?
I mean, it's funny. Things in life happen fast, but you remember it in slow motion. So it was just a second or two that I may have looked, really glanced up and been able to see. But I remember it in slow motion. So to me, it seems like it was an eternity. But when you look at the replay of what happened, because it's well documented on video, what I was looking at, and it was seconds.
Oof. Oh my God. I know, obviously, according to Channel 4, you spent the next 27 days working 16 hours a day trying to find survivors. What was that process like?
Yeah, so it's actually 27 tours of duty. So it wasn't actually consecutive days. But so I did 27 additional tours of duty through December of 2001. So with that, it meant going back. At first, I was part of the bucket brigade, which is they couldn't bring a big bulldozer. They didn't want to put that on top of the pile.
Right.
Didn't want to compress any possible person that was still alive. Right. So we had to just dig by hand and put the rocks and debris by hand into the bucket and pass it one guy to the other, then pass it one guy. So that I've done. Then a lot of days I was on a medical standby at Ground Zero in case the workers got hurt. But I mean, the main thing was we were looking to see if anybody could be alive. And all that time, and I just feel terrible. All that searching, with my guys, did not find anybody alive. Found bodies, but no one alive.
And even to this day, 20 years later, there's still people who are actually still missing.
People still missing, people still unidentified. I mean, it's for the families, it's just a horror, because it's natural to still have in your mind, could they have just been a daze or went to hospital or something? As you can understand, in New York, so many of the families had photos of their family members, and they would see anybody on the street, or especially seeing me in uniform, and they'd say, "Hey, did you see this person? Did you see this person?" That day, including my coworkers who were asking me, from September 11th, and while I was there, did you see this coworker? Did you see this guy? And it's just terrible and terrible.
How did you maintain your professionalism, that is, in the eye of terrorism?
Yeah. Well, how I maintain my professionalism, number one, was my main focus was doing my job. So when you focus on doing your job, everything slows down, and all the other noise kind of goes out. So I wasn't thinking about really whether or not this was terrorism, whether or not it was a navigational situation, whether or not it was just an anomaly. I didn't know what it was. Honestly, let's just say I didn't focus on that. The main thing I was focusing on was finding casualties and looking to take care of them. That's what you do as a paramedic, as a first responder. You want to save lives. So that's the main thing I want to do. It's mainly after, in discussion and in hearing, oh man, something happened in Shanksville, something happened at the Pentagon. You hear this stuff, and then okay, it's a organized, kind of terrorist attack that we're part of. But all I wanted to do was find people who were alive or help people that were hurt. That's the only thing I was focused on.
And did you ever find your partner?
Yes, hours later. It's funny. We were right beside one another, but in the chaos of we call it egress of running, we kind of separated. He he turned down a block while I kind of went straight with the other guys and able to find him. So he survived. So I feel very happy about that.
Yeah,
so
thank
my
God.
partner that day did survive.
Yeah, thank God for that. How many people from your department were missing, and how many people from your department actually unfortunately died?
Yeah, I mean, there were at least 3 guys that were from my initial EMS, wave, that went down, when I was sent. But you got to understand, it's 3 in total, 343 of my coworkers, lost their lives that day. I mean, how do you recover from that? How do you recover? And a lot of other coworkers, I knew, guys, good guys, strong guys, and it's guys and gals that lost it that day. But, some of the guys, strong family guys, guys that, one guy, a guy I've worked with a lot, Mikey Kiefer he runs triathlons, just strong. He absolutely, his reports, he made it up to the 72nd floor, holding hose and an oxygen tank, really just a strong kid. And geez, just still no match for that building. It's just so heavy and really just terrible. It's just bothersome to this day.
Bothersome to this day, man. So what was September 12th like?
Yeah, so on September 11th, I spent 23 hours, at ground zero, going back from, I was there from the morning and, went back there by World Trade Center number 7 after its collapse, right. And then went down to ground zero. And this is the first time, it was at night, that I could see everything in its entirety, all the skeleton of the debris, and that was in the middle of the night. And so 23 hours, so September 12th was just in the morning, went to my girlfriend's house. She lived in New Jersey, okay. And really just wanted to just go to sleep. And it's funny because my whole uniform was just filled with I didn't even know how much dust and everything was just whitish gray, all over me. And she just took it and brought it to the cleaners, not knowing that some people have actually kept it as some sort of memorial. But she brought it to the laundromat and had it washed so I can use it again, and before going back, which I ended up going back again, of course.
Of course. And what was that camaraderie like, down there when you guys were just passing bucket to bucket to the next person, trying to find somebody and trying to, deal with that situation there at ground zero?
Yeah, the camaraderie was incredible. Number one, being on the pile itself was dangerous because you had to, as you walked on the pile, there were voids that, can be 10, 15, 20, 25 feet down. So sometimes you're on rebar and you're just straddling, right. Different. You have to walk over those voids. So it was a dangerous situation. And so kind of like when you're in that with your fellas, right. You have a bond, right there that, hey, we're doing this together. And the goal is to find somebody alive. They had, of course, dogs that were there from the federal government, and they were on the pile. And then everyone would have to stop at times. They'll ring a bell, and we'd have to stop in place and be really quiet, to use electronic equipment to try to listen to see if they can hear someone talking. And it's a very extensive operation. But our goal, everybody had the same goal. If we could just find, one person still alive, someone in a void, it would make all this extraneous effort, all this incredible effort worth it. If we could just find someone.
And when you were down at ground zero, how many people were found actually alive?
Yeah, when I was down there, from that first 23 hours, word got that there was a Port Authority guy that was found. So that's a word that I had got gotten that he was found there that night, when I was down there that first night. But I still did not hear of anyone else. Every time I went back to ground zero, all those 27 additional tours, it were bodies that were found. Yeah.
Obviously, you are an entrepreneur, you're a husband, you're a father now. But where are you still mentally 20 years later?
Yeah, well, where I am mentally is, my view is this is a tragedy. I had to make a choice September 12th, whether or not I'm going to curl up in a corner and be depressed and just feel bad about the events and live my life in fear, or say that, geez, 3,000 people died, friends of mine, 343 coworkers. There's a reason why I was spared. Let me do something great with life. And so from that point on, it was about just doing positive things in life. And that's where I am mentally, to this day. There's nothing, if we have an idea, we go for it. There's no, tomorrow's not guaranteed, as I said before. So to me, if I have an idea in my head, whether it's entrepreneurial, whether it's for just making the world a better place, whether it's in anything, if I have an idea, I don't put it off for tomorrow, okay, I'll deal with this when I'm older, or I'll deal with this in a few years. No, the time is now to deal with whatever you have in your mind that's a great idea. And that's where really I am mentally now. Do I suffer from survivor's guilt? Absolutely. I feel bad for guys, and why am I here and other guys aren't? But to me, it honors them by being a great person, and now and doing the best I can in life here since I was spared. To me, it's better to do that than to wallow in depression and pity.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, we thank you for your public service to this country, and it's always been a pleasure. And I've always wanted to interview you for Quintin's Close-Up. So,
wow.
Yeah. But I'm sorry we have to do it under these circumstances. But it was good to get your story out to the people.
Appreciate that.
Yeah,
I tell you, I mean, the real heroes, I always like to say, the ones that made the ultimate sacrifice. Again, so many of them that I knew, and then guys that came down, but they're the real heroes. And if anyone gets down to the 9/11 museum in Manhattan, my story, my face, everything is there in the museum, which is fantastic. But to me and my family are able to have that for generations. But definitely, it's a great memorial and great museum for anyone to go to and really understand. So our goal is always to never forget, so this doesn't happen again. We figure out a way to get along in the world, whether it's with your fellow man, somehow to work out differences, so we don't have to resort to terrorist attacks and bombings and war, and we got to figure it out.
Yes, indeed. Well, Mr. D. Bree Arnold, thank you so much for your time, and again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I got to get you and your wife back on to talk about burgers one day.
Definitely. We're ready.
Okay. I'll be ready too. Thank you.
All right now. Thank you.
You're welcome.